Hello and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today my guest is Tara Cremin. Hey Tara, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. To give our listeners a little bit of background on you, Tara Cremin is the Senior Manager of Author Experience at Kobo Writing Life, responsible for everything from optimizing current features to looking for new avenues of growth with an aim to make KWL the greatest and most user-friendly self-publishing platform available. Tara has worked for KWL since its inception and was previously responsible for content operations, and she's also an occasional guest host on the Kobo Writing Life podcast. And Tara is getting more than her fair share of podcast exposure recently because I'd invited Tara on the Indie Author podcast to talk about international pricing, how to price ebooks for an international market. And we had that conversation about a week ago, and it was great. You'll get to hear it. And then I went to edit it, and I realized that some of the things we talked about would make more sense if they were discussed in the context of already having some foundational information about pricing for one's own market, which in the context of the listener base for the Indie Author podcast is largely US. So in the context of US markets. So I asked, and Tara was gracious enough to offer to come back for a second discussion. This one focused on pricing for the US market. So Tara, thank you again for agreeing to do that.
Yeah, not a problem at all. Happy to chat.
Great. One of the things I wanted to start out talking about with pricing in ebooks generally is it seems as if traditional and indie are meeting up in the middle a little bit. It used to be that a lot of indie books were 99 cents, $1.99, very inexpensive. And traditionally published ebooks were upwards of $11.99, $14.99, way more expensive. It seems like the traditional prices are coming down a little bit and the indie prices are rising a little bit. Are you seeing that from your perspective? And if you are, what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, we definitely are. When ebooks sort of went out, traditional publishers sort of looked at them and just priced along the same lines as a physical book. You know, my physical book costs this much, so it is the same thing as an ebook, and I'll price that amount. But consumers didn't want that because it's not something that's as tangible and that you can keep as a physical book. So whereas then we had indies that were coming in and pricing super, super low, and there was a bit of a stigma at the beginning. I'm talking like maybe like 10 years ago or more, where indie books were just like the 99-cent bargain books. And if you wanted a real book, you would go and like pay a little bit more. But that's a very kind of old-fashioned way of looking at things. Now our indies are not afraid of pricing their books for what they're worth. And traditional publishers are realizing that they maybe came in a bit too aggressive. So what we're seeing is that the pricing is definitely starting to meet in the middle.
If I'm a new indie author and I finished my first book, I've done all the things that we recommend, getting the professional edit, the professional proofread, the professional cover design, and now I'm ready to put it out on Kobo Writing Life or the other platforms. Where should I start my thinking or my research in terms of what price to attach to that ebook when it launches?
The first thing that you should consider is the length of your book, how many words, and then I would look at your genre, because genre pricing is still slightly varied. The pricing isn't exactly, it's this length on each ebook format, so therefore it's this price. So those are the two main things that I would really take into consideration. Some people will say for you to investigate the different platforms, like you would price differently on one platform versus the other. But if you're publishing wide as an author, I think you should sort of treat the platforms the same because you don't have to worry about different price matching or things like that. So make a note of the length of your book, look at the genre that you're publishing in, and really just look around and see what other authors are doing in a similar length and similar genre. It's quite easy to do this on Kobo. On the main ebook page, on any product page of a book, it tells you the number of hours that a book can be read and the number of minutes. So then it's easy to see where your book fits in. And then you can look at if you liked this author, you'd like this author too. Those lists on all platforms, I would do some investigation there. It can be hard to define who an indie book or who a traditionally published book is. So I wouldn't be too caught up on that.
Kobo is a really nice resource for finding out how long other books are, because not all the platforms show the word count, and Kobo does show the word count, so that's a nice resource to have. Can you describe what are some of the higher priced genres and what are some of the lower priced genres?
Sure. So it's kind of the same as that you would see in any old bookshop. Nonfiction tends to be priced a lot higher because they tend to be very long books. There's a lot of footnotes and more investigation that goes into them. So those tend to definitely be the higher priced books, and then fiction being lower. And then within fiction itself, within the subgenres, there really isn't that much of a difference in the nuanced prices. So I'd be hesitant in sort of saying this genre is lower than this genre because it is sort of always a bit in flux.
Is there a cutting off point in terms of word count or length that says that people who are reading a book under a certain number of words expect a price break under books that are over a certain number of words?
There's no rule set in stone for it. One of the great things about ebooks is that your prices aren't forever, so you really have the opportunity to be flexible with them. I don't know how much attention people spend thinking this myself. As a customer, do you go for a book that is getting the value that you're going to spend 6 hours, or do you follow the author? You're going to read whatever they're going to put out. So I wouldn't stress too much about it should be this length. I would be more inclined to look at what's comparable in the genres that you're also working in.
Odd consideration now that we're still in the midst of the COVID pandemic is that right after this hit, and it became clear that there were going to be these serious economic consequences in addition to the serious health consequences, a lot of people I saw started discounting their books on the theory that people who were perhaps furloughed or it was the bit they could do to make life easier for readers who were maybe facing some economic challenges. Did you see that in your own business? And is it something that's continuing or you hear about continuing?
Yeah, we definitely saw it at the beginning. We had these huge campaigns all over the world. We were calling them the Stay Home and Read, and they were in 6 or 7 other languages. But we had Stay Home and Read campaigns that we ran with publishers and authors themselves that was offering discounted or free books to people that were affected in these areas. And not necessarily just people that were affected, basically to everyone. I think in the first month, Kobo, we gave away 10 million ebooks, which is crazy. It was really nice to be able to help that many people while they're staying home and just kind of give them something to keep their mind off of things. But we definitely did see then a pivot slightly back to normal after the initial month. I do think it's wonderful to offer discounts and lowering your pricing for these readers. I would look at it as you would any kind of marketing campaign. I know that might sound a little bit heartless of looking at the COVID as a marketing campaign. What I mean by that is to let your readers know that your books are sort of being discounted or that they're at a lower price, because they might not initially realize that. Something that people should really think about is what other ways can you hit a reader that maybe can't necessarily afford your book right now. So libraries are a super resource for this, and I think that we've seen library sales have definitely skyrocketed during this time. You can easily opt your books into library distribution through Kobo Writing Life, and you earn 50% off of each library sale once you set your library price. So that can be a really good way of somebody's come to you and they're saying that they can't afford your book right now, and you can let them know, hey, you can just ask for it at your local library. Also, subscription programs like Kobo Plus has one available just in the Netherlands and Belgium, but that might be something that can appeal to readers instead of not paying full price for a book, that they want to just have a more all-you-can-eat model. So I would explore what other ways can you make your books accessible without completely taking a dip on your bottom line.
You had mentioned libraries, and it was pretty late in the game before I realized that you can charge more for a library copy than you can for a regular copy, because obviously you're selling it once and you're hoping that many people buy it. So for the price scenario where a library is buying it once and they can loan it out as many times as they'd like, is there any advice you have about what people should be pricing their library price at?
For libraries, like you mentioned, your book can be loaned out multiple times. It can be kind of a confusing way to think about a digital book, but you should just think about it in the same way as a physical book that's in the library. One person is reading it, they bring it back, and then one other person is reading it. So your book is getting loaned multiple times. So this is why you want to increase your ebook price. You don't want to have the same ebook price that you would have normally, because that's sort of undervaluing how many times your book might get read. The rule of thumb that we advise people to go toward is to price along the same line as a mass market paperback. So that's sort of a good benchmark to go for.
The amount that a mass market paperback would sell to libraries or would sell on the retail market?
On the retail market.
I found that I priced mine quite high. My normal ebook price is $4.99, and I priced at $29.99 for libraries, but I combined that with a very personalized campaign to particular librarians. And I think that combination of the personal touch made the higher price palatable, but something that definitely people could experiment with and see what the library market will bear in that scenario.
Absolutely. And there's also the other option for librarians that's called a cost per checkout. And this allows them to purchase your ebook just once, and it only gets read that one time. They purchase your book for 10% of the library price. So if you were saying there that your library price was $29.99, they could purchase it once for $2.99, and then it could go just for one reader. Or they could purchase multiple for that price. It's a really great way for librarians to not be afraid to take a chance on an author that they haven't heard of before, that they can take the lower price. And if they keep getting people asking for it, then they can buy your higher price book as well.
Is that difference between whether the book is being sold for a one-time charge or a cost per checkout a decision that the author or the publisher makes, or is it something that comes along with the platform they're loading their book to?
It depends which platform they're using on Kobo Writing Life. Once you enter your price, both options are available for librarians, but this might vary from platform to platform. But the choice of the purchase, that comes to the librarian specifically.
Is it possible on Kobo Writing Life, for example, to offer a book both as a one-time charge and as a cost per checkout model?
Yep, ours are all defaulted in to include both models.
We had also touched very briefly on the concept of the series. What is your advice in pricing for a series, and does it depend on how many books are in the series?
It absolutely does depend on how many books are in the series. If you're a relatively new author and you're on book 2 of your series, you're probably not going to be changing the price up too much between books. If you are on book 17 of your series, you might be wanting to reconsider the price of the first 5 books that you have. I'm always in awe of authors that are able to write to a 17-book series, but we see it quite frequently. Authors tend to start playing around with the price once it hits like book 3 of the series mark. I think it's probably a good rule of thumb to know how long your series will be as well when you're trying to come up with your pricing plan. Are you planning on having a 5-book series, or is it something that you probably will keep going on forever? That will factor into how you want to set your pricing for sure. What I can tell you that we're seeing at Kobo that people are experimenting with is a different tier of pricing. Say if you have your 5 books in your series, you would price your first book lower to sort of entice your readers in, and then you would tier up your pricing until you get to your steady price point. That can be a good way of hooking readers at the beginning and kind of walking them up to your normal price.
I have 2 series. One is 3, and that's it. And the other one currently has 2. The third one will be coming out, and that will be ongoing. My regular price is $4.99. It sounds like maybe I shouldn't worry at this point about pricing the first one lower. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely subjective to each author, but because it's a 3rd book, I would use this more as a promotional opportunity. So with, say, like the free first in series, you could try it for a short period with a series that is just 3 books, and we still see it as a really viable marketing tool.
Talk a little bit about the idea of perma-free. Let's start with the first in the series and what you see as the pros and cons of that.
Whenever you set a book for free, one thing to consider first off is what's your aim of what you're doing with your book being free? Is your aim going to be to generate more readers, or is it to generate more sales? Once you figure out which option is for you, you're going to have a better ability to plan your promotional opportunities. So just wanted to say that up front. But in terms of pros and cons, the first con is, and I think mainly the only one, you're not getting paid. Like you're putting your content out there for free. But luckily, there are many, many pros to this. You're reaching readers that are taking a chance on your book that they may not normally take a chance on. The read through then for a series can be really, really great. It's a good way of attracting new readers. There's a lot of promotional opportunities for free, especially on Kobo. We have a free page that we curate, and we have editors' picks in our free, and we have lots of different genres, whether it's like romance or sci-fi or thrillers or nonfiction. If it's perma-free or only free for a certain amount of time, you can apply to be featured in these. The same with BookBub. It can be a great way of boosting your recognition and reaching new readers and kind of getting them in that series. It can be also a good tool if you wanted to build up your mailing list, which I really think is kind of the author's, I was going to call it a magic wand, but that seems like a terrible analogy, but it's like the main tool in your toolbox is your mailing list, because those are your diehard fans that are going to follow you. They've chosen to click onto your mailing list, you're talking to them directly. It's marketing that you can't pay for, but you might pay for. But that can be a great way to use free. We see people that do it with mailing lists. If you have a novella that's in between a new series or when your series are releasing, that can be a great way of just offering that to a mailing list. There's many more pros than there are cons. The majority of authors that I talk to, the successful authors, never lose money on a free book. It really comes back to them. So they're not that worried about it, which is something that traditional publishing is still scared of. Like, they're still terrified of free. That's why I think indies are doing so well, is because they're not afraid to experiment with this stuff.
Do you have a sense of the difference in response from readers between a free book and a 99-cent book?
It's very hard to quantify that. It's hard to gauge it. I think they would probably treat them the same. I think it depends on if the 99-cent book is on a promotion, you know. If that book's full price is 99 cents, I think that has more of a negative connotation than a free book potentially. Yep. That's just my personal opinion on how a customer might perceive the value of a book. But yeah, that could be a whole other podcast, I think, and another debate.
There are three reasons that I've shied away from free. One is just a general philosophical objection to offering my stuff for free. Another is the idea that people who are picking things up for free, as opposed to, let's say, 99 cents or $1.99 or something like that, are more likely maybe just to be looking for anything they can get that's free, rather than seeing it as possibly an entree to the series. And then the third one is just the difficulty logistically of getting a book for free on Amazon and keeping it there. Right. So can you talk a little bit about the logistical challenges on the platforms that you're familiar with in getting a book free and keeping it there if you want to use it as perma-free?
Yeah, and so on Kobo, there's no restriction to free. You can set it free at any time. We have a price promotion tool. So if you wanted to set free ahead of time, you can do that, and you can set it for just a specific period. I totally understand your concern about not getting your type of reader. You're getting those bargain hunters that are maybe just like adding free books to their library and not actually ever reading them. But that's where it comes back to the point of what you're doing with your free. If you're trying to get readers, or you're just trying to like tot up numbers, are you trying to get 100 free downloads? It can be very easy to hit that number. But if you're trying to gain readers, you might have to be a bit more thoughtful with it, which is why I think it's a good way to interact with the fans that you sort of already have. I think that works if you have many books. I am thinking all of these conversations in my head with an author that has published probably at least 12 to 15 books or something along those lines. If your catalog is smaller, I think free can kind of hurt you, and you don't want to be undervaluing your work as you're trying to get your name in this vast space.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you had said earlier about whether your goal is reaching readers or making sales? In what way should people factor that into their pricing strategy?
That was specific to free itself, but with your pricing strategy, obviously you want to try and generate as many sales as possible. If you're trying to hit new readers, it can be good to have promotions that are in those areas, whether it's discounting your regular pricing, whether it's trying free or something like that. But if you're trying to generate more sales, that's where I think that you should do your research into your book length, your genre, like something we're talking about next, is how often you should reassess your pricing. And that lends into, if you're trying to generate more sales, maybe reevaluate the pricing that you have set and make sure that you are being competitive. So yeah, outside of free, that's how those sort of ideas would work.
The last question I have about US pricing is, can you talk about what consideration authors should give to the impact on their royalties on different platforms based on the price that they assign to their book?
Sure. This can be quite tricky if you're an author that is wide and you're publishing on multiple platforms, and you have to consider the pricing there. So you want to keep an eye on what your threshold for your royalties are. On Kobo, if you price over $2.99, that's when you'll receive 70%. There's no higher threshold. So you can price to the moon and receive 70%. This can be a really great thing for box sets, which we didn't talk about in series, but they can also be a really great way to entice readers. So if you're pricing your box sets a little bit higher, you're still earning 70%. But that can be quite difficult to say if you're publishing on Amazon and there is a different price point to earn that 70%. And so I would just sort of say, think about that strategy within your pricing. We do see people that publish Kobo specific box sets so they can take advantage of not reducing their earnings. That's something definitely to consider. I would just like research the market. You don't want to accidentally set a price in all of these platforms and actually hurt yourself and not realize it. Have a little research on the terms that you're getting.
Do you have any advice on a formula to apply to determine the pricing of a box set?
I think this varies from platform to platform because customers are different. On Kobo, we see that our customers look at box sets more as a matter of convenience rather than necessarily a bargain. So when your box set's full price, there's no rule where it's like, all right, I'm going to have the price of each book multiplied by the type of books I have. Do research on what similar box sets are. But one thing, just to not undervalue your books and have a nice round price for your box sets. We do a lot of box set promotions throughout the year. I think we do 6 or 8 that are available through our promotions tab. And those are often like 40% discounts on box sets specifically. And Kobo readers absolutely love them. So we find that as people price higher, then it's a 40% discount. The readers are getting a sale, but then you're also still earning the 70%, and that could potentially still be over the $9.99. So that's sort of speaking to Kobo specifically. But with box sets, you'd have to be a bit careful about not hurting your earnings and then just checking how readers respond to them on the different platforms. That's why we do see some specific to Kobo box sets, and then you don't have to necessarily worry about price matching or losing earnings.
Well, I think that provides a really nice background on U.S. pricing specifically, and we'll get a chance in part 2 to delve into international pricing. So listeners should stay tuned for part 2.